The Education of OverSoul7 by Jane Roberts. Read by Martin John. Chapter 13. Joseph's Pictures of Magic and Jonathan's Revenge. Joseph eyed his canvas. He was painting a tiled courtyard. When he was finished, each tile would be perfect, individually patterned and glowing. The glazes he would use. He almost chortled with delight. And the towering cliffed walls, impossibly high, yet somehow right. The scene in his mind was so vivid that he felt a mixture of torture and exaltation as he tried to capture it. In fact, he was so filled with inspiration that he felt transformed. Only a few days earlier, all he could think of was food. Now it was the last thing on his mind. Jonathan left a tray underneath his door twice a day. Sometimes it was hardly touched when he retrieved it. Thinking of Jonathan, Joseph glowered and stared at the windows. Time and time again he begged Jonathan to take the boards down, from the top at least, so he could have decent light. The lamps weren't enough. For one thing, the tiled courtyard was an outdoor scene. He couldn't duplicate that light under these conditions. And what could Jonathan do to them if he ripped the boards down himself? The glass would be ruined, of course, because he'd have to do it from the inside. Joseph went back to his painting, forgetting everything else for a while. Then he stood back once more, studying his painting. It was obvious. The light just wouldn't do. In fresh outrage, he yelled out loud, broke the top window glass with the chair, and banged at the boards that had been nailed up outside. Even the noise he made sounded satisfying. Serves them right, he thought, enjoying the onrush of energy, grinning as a light came splashing through the room. He heard the pounding footsteps rush up the stairs, and in a moment Jonathan came in, yelling, when he saw the damage. Broken glass was all over the floor. Jonathan lunged at Joseph, cursing. "The glass! The fine, expensive glass!" he kept shouting. "I'll pay for it. I'll pay. I can't work in that miserable light," Joseph yelled, fighting him off. Jonathan was so shocked that finally he just stood aside, staring at the glass. "I warn you," he said, this time in a desperate, quiet voice. "This time you've gone too far." Joseph turned back to his painting. "I'll pay for the glass," he shouted again wearily. "I told you I needed decent light. Before winter, I'll sell these for good prices, and you'll have your precious windows back. Now let me work." "You're a crazy man. Crazy. Wait till my father gets back from the fields. We're not going to get any glass for your windows ever again." "Good," Joseph said. He laughed out loud and went back to work, leaving Jonathan to sputter and rage until finally he left, slamming the door behind him. When Jonathan was gone, Joseph left the easel, danced in the sunlight that came through the open windows, twirling clumsily around in circles like a circus bear. Then he returned to his canvas. All he cared about now were his paintings. He'd never been so inspired in his life, for any period of time. To work at such a pitch! When you had inspiration, you didn't need discipline. he thought gleefully. Or at least inspiration had its own built-in discipline. His paintings came like magic out of nowhere, or out of somewhere of his dreams or imagination. The afternoon went so quickly that Joseph thought only a few moments had passed when Jonathan returned with his father. Without paying too much attention, Joseph was aware of the annoying noise in the hall, the footsteps again, and then Jonathan and Elgrin were in the room. The old man gasped, and Jonathan shouted with triumphant spite. Joseph just turned around and looked at them with all the fierceness he could muster. "I warned you that I needed light. I pleaded, but would you take down the boards? No. So it's your fault for being so stupid." "I told you he's crazy," Jonathan said with some awe. Elgrin stood there, round, fat, and serious. "There's something here we don't understand," he said slowly. "Men just don't act like that. Not ordinary men." "That's what I mean. He's—" For once Elgrin motioned his son to be quiet. "The destruction of perfect glass," he said. "Only the finest houses can have such windows. They're the pride, he broke off. "It's demonic, wanton destruction. I liked you. Despite it all, I liked you." "You had a fine way of showing it," Joseph shouted, getting red-faced. "Locking me up. For your own good. To make you fulfill your bargain." "That was only right," Jonathan shouted back. "We gave you food again when you started to paint, even though you made no progress on our painting," Elgrin said, as if his heart would break. "Thank you. Thank you." "I'm grateful, I'm sure," Joseph thundered. "And there's your painting. It's started. Begun." He pointed dramatically at the one prosaic, uninspired painting in the room. "The undercoating's done. I'm just waiting for it to dry." Jonathan ran over, touched it. "It feels dry enough to me," he said. "You just set it aside to do these other crazy paintings to spite us." "The window glass," Elgrin said with a deep sigh. "We can just stop feeding you again. You take our food on false pretenses unless you finish our painting." "I don't care about eating anyway," Joseph said, his warm brown eyes filled with vehemence. "I'll just paint what I want and eat the pillows if I have to." "Eat the pillows? I told you he's mad," Jonathan said. "There's still something here that we don't understand," Elgrin said to his son. "So shut up and let me think." Joseph snorted. Jonathan paced the room angrily. Elgrin stared at Joseph. "We might as well not exist for you," he said finally. "You don't see us at all as us, just as we affect you and your paintings. We don't exist for you." He paused, struck by his own words, frightened by them even. I just want to work, to paint," Joseph said, not understanding at all. "You'll get your painting. I'll do it. You see, it's begun. I'll pay for your glass. I'll sell some of these paintings, then I'll pay." "He's possessed," Jonathan shouted. "That's it." "Possessed by nincompoops like you," Joseph yelled back. But real uneasiness gnawed at him. Something in Elgrin's face worried him, and he realized suddenly that he needed the Hosenhoffs. Suppose they put him out and he lost his workspace. He was dependent on them right now. All at once he felt threatened, really threatened. Any commotion and his inspiration could vanish. Who knew? Forever, maybe. He tried to smile pleasantly, feeling the muscles in his face go all wiggly with the effort. Just let me paint, and you'll have all the fine paintings you want. The one of the house, and the portraits too. He blushed furiously, feeling abject, miserable, amazed at the change in circumstances. He tried to see Elgren as a person, but all he could see was a pompous, fat, funny caricature of a man. Which he was, Joseph thought angrily. "Ah, just don't torment me," he said in exasperation. "We'll be back," Elgren said. No doubt, Joseph answered. He glowered at nothing in particular when they gone. Elgren was taking him seriously in some way that he didn't understand, he thought. And now all he wanted was to stay here in this room more than anything in the world so he could paint, while only a week ago all he wanted to do was get out of it. Somehow that gave the Hosentofs a hold over him that no one had ever had before. He was a prisoner of his own inspiration. Where had his freedom gone? It came to him all at once that he didn't even want to go outside, just to paint and to keep up with the ideas that were coming so quickly for the first time in his life. They fascinated him. Did they frighten him, too, coming from nowhere as they seemed to? "Bah!" he said aloud. "Thinking could drive you crazy." He went back to work. In a matter of minutes he forgot everything but the painting on the easel. It was early twilight when Elgren and Jonathan returned, and instantly Joseph sensed a change in their manner. For one thing, they weren't wearing work clothes. They were dressed for visiting. For another, there was an odd formality in the way they entered the room, quietly, not yelling or shouting at him, soberly. He was still painting, trying to get the last use of the daylight, and he said impatiently, "Can't it wait? My first day of sunlight. Can't I at least use it all?" "We'll wait," Elgren said, as if he were a pleasant stranger or a prospective buyer in to look at paintings. Beside him, Jonathan nodded with a broad smile. Joseph was alerted. If Jonathan was smiling, something was really wrong, he thought. He began cleaning his brushes in turpentine, his mustache bristling. He was getting low on supplies, and where would he get more? "May we sit down?" Elgren asked. The polite question so alarmed Joseph that he turned around too quickly and knocked his palette to the floor. "I'll get it," Jonathan said, retrieving it and getting paints all over his hands. At the sight of this help from Jonathan, Joseph plunked himself down on the edge of the bed, threw up his hands, and said, "All right, I give up. What are you trying to do?" Elgren cleared his throat. "We had a family conference about you," he began. Joseph groaned. No, we've some matters to discuss with you quite frankly, to your advantage." Joseph wanted to shout, "To my advantage? When have you been concerned with my advantage?" but something told him to remain still. He looked at his hands and pursed his lips. They must want something, he thought craftily. Otherwise they wouldn't be so nice. Best to be quiet, then, and make them come out with it. Yes, a family conference, Jonathan said. Silence. Joseph refused to speak. Elgrin began, leaning forward earnestly. With all good regards, still you broke our glass, and you have no way to pay us for doing it. You can't sell enough paintings now to pay for such expensive glass. And you owe us at least one family portrait and a picture of the house for your room and board these months. Instead, you work on other paintings that you, at least, take very seriously. So, Joseph said impatiently. They were driving him mad with their politeness. What to do honorably was the question, Elgrin said. Throwing you in jail was no answer, though we considered it, because then you'd never pay us and we'd never get our paintings done either. Not feeding you might make you so weak no chance of payment for the glass. Putting you out of the house would let you go scot-free. And so it occurred to us that you would like this thing settled also, so you knew where you stood. Then you could go on painting without worry, Jonathan said quickly. Joseph scowled. So this idea of yours, whatever it is Jonathan's... He's that worried about my state of mind, Joseph said, thundering out. Jonathan grinned smugly. Elgrin spread his hands. We have problems, like any family. You may be able to help us with one of them. And... I just want to paint, Joseph interrupted. Will you get to the point? Stop torturing me. Bianca likes you, Elgrin said so quickly and flatly that Joseph snapped forward. How much did Elgrin and Jonathan know? Had the younger brother squealed? Joseph felt his face turning red. Don't be embarrassed, Elgrin said. She likes you. So that's a fact that we have to take into consideration. There aren't many young men around here. The farmhands are all right, but she thinks you're different, romantic, maybe. You know how women are. Joseph didn't dare say a thing. He didn't like the smile on Jonathan's face or the air of absolute earnestness on Elgrin's. It's time for her to have a husband, Jonathan said, now looking everywhere but at Joseph. She thinks you would make her a good man, Elgrin added. Now wait. She doesn't like too many young men. The opportunities are limited around here. It would be different in the cities. You hate me, Joseph shouted. Jonathan hates me. Your wife can't stand me. You'd think I'd marry into such a family? You're all out of your minds. He sprang up, furious, confused, sputtering with outrage, but surprised with himself. Underneath it all, a part of him thought coldly, a guaranteed place to live and work, a woman built in when he wanted one. They'd have to buy his art supplies too, or he wouldn't do it. Astounded by these thoughts, he yelled, No, no, I won't consider it under any circumstances. No, my answer is no. These things are delicate. Think about it, Elgrin said. I told Bianca this would be your first reaction. First and final and last, Joseph yelled. He stood up and tamped about the room. "Or we confiscate your paintings and supplies and have you thrown into jail," Jonathan said mildly. Joseph stopped in his tracks. "That's blackmail. Besides, I'd make a miserable husband. You'd have to help in the fields in the morning or do the morning chores. The rest of the time you could paint," Elgren said. "Your own painting made me change my opinion of you. You've worked at it steadily now. It consumes you. This is good. It means that eventually you will sell your paintings. A good artist in the family." He paused and added, "You could do pictures for my relatives, too. That is a fine cultural thing to do." "You'd never get out of debtor's prison," Jonathan said. "But you can see our point. We have an investment in you. It's only fair that we come to some understanding, and you'd have this room for your studio. I have the feeling that if your painting is so important, you'd be making a pretty fair bargain." Joseph stared. Jonathan was shrewder than he'd given him credit for. Elgren stood up soberly, again, with that unfamiliar formality, and said, "This is how things are done. We've told you our proposition. Think about it. We'll be back tomorrow for your answer." Joseph didn't answer. It was Bianca, the bitch, who was responsible for his getting caught and dragged back in the first place. All she had to do now was tell her father about their romps. Joseph was sure Elgren didn't know, though Jonathan might. Elgren thought that his daughter was a prize. Not that there was anything really wrong with her, Joseph thought hastily. Only that he wasn't about to marry anybody. The Hosentofts left. Joseph eyed the windows, which thankfully were now unboarded, remembering that soon the land would be clear and open. The fairs would be starting in a month or so. In his mind's eye, he saw himself jaunty and free, doing sketches for a good price, sleeping in cool, fragrant barns. But his eye fell on his unfinished paintings. He had to finish them. He had to have a quiet place to work. What had happened to his freedom? Frowning, he went back to the easel. He wasn't going to marry Bianca, paintings or no. And all the while that he was talking to himself so vehemently, uninvited mental images came into his mind. Bianca leaving him a tray of food while he worked. Bianca as a model, taking every conceivable pose. And in years to come, Joseph the artist, lord of the manor, rich and prosperous, while fat sons did all the work in the fields that he and Bianca had somehow inherited. "You'd better jump out of the window to the shed and just keep going," he told himself, alarmed by these seemingly independent thoughts that glowed so temptingly. Was he being offered an opportunity unequaled where he could work in peace? Or was he in mortal danger of losing all independence? Or both? Or neither? Groaning, he threw his brush down and stared at the wall. End chapter. Peace, light, and love. Aloha.